All right, now it's working. So for the French, and you're back. Yeah. Wasn't anything. So the fighting would range in Europe, and in 1763 basically just exhausted you. They've been fighting pretty. Wow.
He's on our side today.
I'd open them all then. So they met in Paris, and whenever you're given a treaty, it says, "Hey, name a treaty," and you're not sure, put down Paris, roll the die. Skip that. Skip that. We're doing the Vietnam War and special topics in the Paris Peace Accords, where the United States pulled out. It's always a good bet, Paris. And in this unit, as luck would have it, there's going to be 2 treaties of Paris. The treaty that ended the Revolutionary War will be the Treaty of Paris of 1783. It's just the way it goes. So, a big British victory. Humiliating for the French. They'll want revenge. That will be crucial to the United States becoming a country. So let's go through what happened. So first off, Britain got all land east of the Mississippi River. All of it. Including, for 20 years, Spanish Florida. Spain had to give that up because Spain allied themselves with Britain. And so you see from this map, all this area. This is a huge amount of land. Next, Britain kept 3 islands in the West Indies. They called them West Indies then, so that's why I put it there. Today we would say the Caribbean. You don't need to know the island names, but I always forget the islands, so I typed it down so I wouldn't forget. I always remember Guadalupe and Martinique. I always forget Santa Lucia. And these 3 islands, they could have kept New France. They basically gave them the choice, but the sugar was so valuable they kept those islands. Now today, that seems ridiculous, but back then it made sense. These islands would be crucial for the United States surviving. Crucial. Not surviving, but winning the Revolutionary War is what I meant to say. Spain got Louisiana. France did not want Spain to have Louisiana. And that's a background. France did not want Britain to have Louisiana. So they gave the claim to Spain. Now, there were virtually no French colonists. This was still the people who lived there. They lived there and thought it was their land and fighting over the land between themselves. But it was the claim, basically all tributaries of the Missouri River, so you're sitting on that claim right now. Right now. Massive victory. There's more, like for example, Britain got control of most of India. Prussia got land. This was a big victory. And France wants revenge. But the results of the war, the French threat is gone. So much of what kept the colonies loyal, how they acted, but also salutary neglect. Remember that? The French threat. Next, new land. All this new land here. Wow. They claimed it before, but now it's ours. You could also imagine the people who live there going, oh no. Next, the colonists really felt they won the war. They won. They beat back American Indian allies. It was mostly colonial militia that took Fort Duquesne. And what fort did they make there? Named after the first prime minister. Pitt. Yeah, Fort Pitt. And let's see, Quebec, we did all that. And next, Britain, the British government, there was this feeling of resentment. We won this war, and yet the colonists won't do what we say. Don't they understand they are in an inferior position to us, and we are in charge? There was that real feeling. So this is a big contrast, and where the colonists really did feel like they won the war. Which, of course, both attitudes are wrong. And this is always a problem when people are not empathetic, they do not understand how other people feel. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but empathy is a really important thing. And debt. Britain has been paying, issuing those bonds, and they have to get gold. And who has gold to their point of view? The colonists, because they've been avoiding those taxes. Now, there's not gold in the colonies either. Colonies never have money. But in London, they don't see it that way. They see they've been getting a free ride and we're tired of it. And so that leads to what we call the widening breach. And this is something I always like this term because it's the breach between the North and the South. Anybody know what this is a picture of? Yeah, the Boston Massacre. Oh, because it says, good eye. But you said it before you ever saw that word, right? Yes. Just agree. Yeah. So, we already have that down. Okay, so that's a map in 1763. Well done, isn't it? See, I have these kind of topography skills too. And I will show them off later. You will be, the word I'm looking for is in awe. But, right after that happened, and Britain thinking, we won, another war began. Pontiac's War. Now, I put in parentheses rebellion, and I'll come back to that, but it's 1763, you notice? They're still negotiating in Paris, and the ink isn't even dry, and they're fighting along the frontier. What happened was this. All these tribes in the Northwest, now when we think of the Northwest, we think of Washington. When you think of the British colonies and then the new United States, this is the Northwest. I know that seems odd to us, but that's the Northwest. And they realized what has kept them on their land, even though they have to fight, was the rivalry between the British and the French, and now the French are gone. The British are rolling into these old French forts in the Great Lakes, on the Ohio, and on the Mississippi. And they are very worried. Now, they've been fighting each other. The British and the French have been playing them off on each other because they have all these old rivalries. But the Ottawas, and for some reason, instead of an S, I have part of a quotation. So, it was in quotes. No, the Ottawas, which was a tribe of this area of Michigan, powerful tribe. So not only in the thumb, but in the hand of Michigan. They made allies with their enemies. Their enemy tribes, a confederacy to fight the British. Remember the Wampanoags did it for King Philip's War? The Powhatans did it in Virginia. The problem was these never really lasted. Confederacies that come together, confederacies fall apart really easily because there's nothing really binding it together. And so, this confederacy would form off and on. Oh, another really powerful tribe was the Shawnees, but off and on, or then until 1811. To an attempt to try to keep out first the British, then the colonists, then the new United States. And they attacked every fort in the Great Lakes. They attacked them all. And so here is a picture of Pontiac. Remember what I told you, these northwestern tribes, women made the key decisions, but the British always looked at it as the men did. It was a very, very male-dominated, very patriarchal. And here is a little, and this actually, Pontiac and the siege of Fort Detroit, one of the biggest forts in that area. This is actually from the 19th century, and it was to sell tobacco. But they put that on there. I just thought that kind of amusing. I'm not sure how, but it did. And basically it was a stalemate. It was not really a victory for either one. It's really hard to take a fort, especially when you don't have the weapons and the organization. But the British couldn't resupply. But the British are like, oh God, not another war. We've been fighting these wars. We don't want to fight anymore. We don't want to have continuous battles here just after we beat the French. And so the British government, now, so we're talking about the royal government back in London. Oh, and they just took over New France. So they have this whole group of French-speaking Catholics who live there that they really think they can't control. Religion was a big deal. Remember I told you how they always had to have, like, for example, a Protestant monarch in England. We don't want this again. So, they're going to appease the aggression, or not the aggression, the desires of the tribes there to hold on to the tribal land, and that will lead to, oh, we're jumping down, proclamation of 1763. I don't know why I put the passing boards there. For some reason, maybe I accidentally moved the slide. The proclamation of 1763. And this was a proclamation, so a proclamation is basically a royal decree from the king, but it actually got its start through Parliament, and it's the brand new king, King George III. And what it did is this. Okay. So, the tribes are going to hold their land, and so what they're going to say is they don't want war anymore, and so they're going to stop the reason the tribes got together. By the way, if they stop the reason why the tribes formed that confederacy, the confederacy will break apart. And they knew that. And so the British are not thinking, we're going to give in, we'll be back later for the land. No colonial settlement west of this river valley. I really wish I could put a different picture up, but I'm stuck. They won't let us change the pictures anymore. Don't know why. And I can see it's not like adding programs. I've never programmed found on the internet, but a picture. Okay, no colonial settlement. So what we're talking about is the divide of the Appalachian Mountains. So basically along this line, and then they just kind of winged it in Georgia. And this was never clear. There'd be a war up here between the U.S. and the British in the 1840s called the Stop War, but that's coming later. And so with that, and I'm sure everybody was fine with this agreement, right? Who went nuts? They thought we won this land. It's ours. And you're taking it away? They were furious. Now let's go back to something. So we have this. So Pontiac and the Confederacy won, but it wasn't a clear-cut victory. You notice I put down war or rebellion. Words matter. Just like I told you yesterday why it's important to know what paternalism means or conspiracy or all that. And remember, when Washington didn't know the words, he signed a document saying that King George II ordered the assassination of a diplomat. You know, words matter. But think about a word like war compared to a word like rebellion. So when I was in school, most of the time you see this, it will be called Pontiac's Rebellion. And you might think, whatever, that's just a word. No, it matters how you think about it. And who's legit, who has power. And the word for power is sovereignty. If you say Pontiac's Rebellion, even if you're sympathetic to that confederacy, you say rebellion, that implies who has ultimate sovereignty or power over that land. The British. So you're just agreeing, well, the British, it's British land. So yeah, they're fighting for the land, but they lived on British land. If you say war, it implies that the Confederacy is doing what? Fighting for their land. Don't the words mean a lot? Words mean a lot. And to their point of view, without a doubt, and the British knew too, it was their land. They were conquering it. And so, little things like that, you might think, well, that doesn't make a big difference. No, it really makes a big difference. Think how your ideas can be manipulated with something as simple as one word. And so that's why it's more correctly called Pontiac's War, but I have to say rebellion because it's just gone through this one. Almost in every textbook, it will say rebellion. Just because that was what the British called it and who wrote the first history of it. The British. So, words matter. So let's get back to this then. Who's mad? These small farmers and these landholders and people who came to the New World thinking that they're going to get a little piece of land and there's no good land left in the East. They're hoping they could cross the mountains and get their piece of land. And don't get those big plantation owners, but more importantly, the speculators. Almost all the major founding fathers were speculators in some way. And it's actually, I'm reading a book about this right now, after the Revolutionary War. And they're talking about all the speculators like, these guys. But they all are upset. All of them. And this is arguably the biggest single cause of the Revolutionary War. Arguably. there are other major causes. So there's going to be all these taxes. Everyone talks about the taxes. And then about rights. And so they'll say things like, well, the British are imposing the Stamp Act, this tax. Okay, that might get people mad, but it's always going to be, they're going to impose a Stamp Act. And don't forget they took our land. What about the Tea Act? And they took our land. Or even when they got rid of the Stamp Act. Sure, they got rid of the Stamp Act, but don't forget they took our land. It always would come back to them. Always, always, always. I can't emphasize that enough. And so it never went out of their mind. We don't have much, and now we can't even get that. And it's ours, and we want it fair and square. Yes, and of course, the people who live there, they're caught in the middle. And so, all the colonies are upset too. Every colony had a claim. Look at Virginia, had all claims here. In fact, Virginia claimed everything. Okay, I'll talk about this in a second. There's talk of a country called Transylvania. Darn it. And all the way to the sea, the colonies thought they're going to get this land too. So they made colonial governments resentful too. Britain, you might argue, was doing the right thing for the people who lived there, at least in the short run. But to the colonial point of view, this was the thing they're going to fight about. So you combine this, taxes, and we'll get to proclamations about slavery down the road. So the colonists just ignored it. They said, hey, nice proclamation. What are you going to do? There's no British soldiers in the colonies. They just crossed over the divide anyways. So right here's the Cumberland Gap over the Appalachian Mountains, and they just walked over and they formed their own colonies. They started moving into areas of really good agricultural land. Now it's the second largest tobacco growing region in the country after North Carolina, in present day Kentucky. And they even talked about making their own country, and it would have been called Transylvania. And it would be awesome because we need more places with vampires. Are you with me on that? And it's never been clear why Transylvania. Transylvania is actually a part of what is now modern-day Romania. And I've looked in, why do they want to call it Transylvania? And it was Trans-Appalachian, and Vania means land, but it's weird. So, a squatter is somebody who just comes in and sits on the land and takes it. With no, here's quotes, legal claim. When I mean legal, that means accepted by the British. Certainly not accepted by the people who live there. So you get my difference. And they just took it. We're just going to sit there. Instead of the various tribes, they're going to come in and they'll be fighting all on the frontier. The most famous of these squatters would be Daniel Boone. Some of you probably heard of Daniel Boone. And Daniel Boone would be constantly in these wars against the tribe trying to protect their land. And when the United States came closer to where he was at, he just kept moving westward. He would die in Missouri in the 1820s, just trying to get away. And this would be just a festering. So even when the British changed the proclamation to open up Transylvania, south of the Ohio, the damage was done from colonial relations. It always went back, and look what they did. Look what they did. Last thing, then we have to get for notes. Britain itself is what we would refer to as, just started to refer to then as a constitutional monarchy. They did not have a constitution like the United States is going to have, and no place else really have. There's a series of laws from the Magna Carta to the Supremacy Act to the Bill of Rights, they lumped together as a constitution. And King George III, the first of the German monarchs, Hanoverian monarchs who actually spoke English, he would be the monarch. So he was a young man when he took power. He'd be king for a long time. For much of it, he was pretty much incapacitated. He basically lost his mind. And we're not exactly sure why, but he did. And so all through the Napoleonic Wars, they had a kind of a, they referred to him as the crazy king. Parliament. Oh, so the king did like foreign policy, controlled the military, but Parliament controlled the money, the taxes, and that's what we call the purse strings. The idea is, you open up the purse, loosen the strings, and give the money out. So this gives Parliament a great amount of power. They're the ones who do the taxation laws. This is what the English Civil War, one of the main causes was taxation. It sticks in the colonists' mind. As the king became more incapacitated, Parliament's going to take more and more power. So we're sitting here right on the edge of when Parliament is beginning to control. Today, the monarch has absolutely no power. Who's the monarch of England? He's the prime minister. Who? Someone say Elizabeth? Yeah, what does she do? Suck up money. They just give her hundreds of millions of dollars every year to, I don't know what she does. It's a little controversial in England. A lot of people really like the Queen. A lot of them say, yeah, but we're giving them like $200 million a year to do nothing. There are two houses of Parliament. The House of Commons, which are chosen from representative districts they call boroughs. They call it them. And they weren't even. Just little districts. And sometimes the district might have one house in it. And they got basically the Lord became member of Parliament. And then another, like one district would be half of London. So it was really unfair at that time. But Commons and then Lords. And Lords, if you're a Lord, you're automatically on the House of Lords. Automatically. They had a peership. And they both had to agree on the taxation. They'd be that way until 1911. Now the Lords are basically just a bunch of mostly old guys who hang out every once in a while in this big room. Sleep, because you're all really old. They have no real power. But they used to then. And here is Commons. But every law starts in the Commons. Now, all the governments in the Commons. The entire government of Britain is the Commons. And we have a remnants of this today. In the United States, we have bicameral or two legislatures, and the more raucous, closer to the people, it's called the House of Representatives, kind of like the Commons. And then the more stately, which is kind of amusing, you know, who's in the body, they have longer terms, they have more individual power. The Senate was more like the Lords. And we'll come back to that. The British got rid of it because it was unworkable. We still have it. So, there are two factions, which we would call today political parties, already developing. The more old, well, country gentlemen, they lived in the countryside. They weren't involved in the new mercantile and industrial changes that are literally just happening. They're called the Tories. And more they're going to be called conservative. And we'll come back to these terms a little bit later, but they want to basically make sure that people like them are in power, not the new urban, well, involved in the new industrial revolution and this crazy thing that's being developed called capitalism. They call themselves Whigs, and they emphasize this idea of personal liberty and rights beyond hierarchy, and that would be called liberal. Now, these terms are with us today, and they're constantly misused, and it amuses me in a way, but also angers me and saddens me too. And we will come back to the definitions of these. But the basis of those words comes out in this era. So that's basically what we're looking at. Let's start the video. So the video starts with the battles of Lexington and Concord, the very first battles of the Revolutionary War, and then backtracks and gives a little history of colonial America. That's a good job. And then talks about the events I have to add them. For example, the video is great, but it doesn't have the proclamation of 1763. One of the things you'll find out is things about the Revolutionary War, they really want to emphasize what goes on in Boston, because that's where it all begins. But Boston, the land wasn't as important as the taxes because they had more merchants. And so you just have a different history. And that's why I have to add it. Other than that, it's really good. I like it. I've started just a couple minutes into it. So almost forgot to hand something out. So start in Lexington. I'll tell you the stories, and then it backtracks. We will finish this tomorrow. Would you like a review list for the test? Do you want one? Do you really want one? Yes. Well, if I would have some, some Kit Kats in that cauldron, maybe. All right. Now, normally, as a year goes by, I will not give you hints on the short ideas. How many short ideas did I say? 40? 45? That's a lot of grade to choose from. So 4 to 5. I really have not decided. Hey, this is writing. Writing's good. You write what you know. You want opportunities to get points. Multiple choices, yes or no. You misread one word, you could lose it. I prefer.
If I miss up one word,
Yeah, I'd much rather write. That's me remembering what it was like to be 70 years ago when I was your age as a student, back in the 1920s. Why the stuff back then? Huh? I don't know. When I get to it. But I want to make sure I got this out. You know there's asterisks next to words? Those can mean anything, couldn't they? What do they mean? Potential choices for short ideas. Right? Oh, and then one is in bold, the Declaration of Independence. There will be one short ID on that for sure. For sure. Without a doubt. The rest of them will be choices. All right, let's get to the video. All right, I got to shut off the camera at home because copyright. They will get very mad at me. The YouTube does not like me. And that's it. Did you get everything?